Today's episode is brought to you by the Tax Defense Group. The team of professionals at the Tax Defense Group are passionate about helping taxpayers resolve their tax debt. Their services include basic tax preparation, tax audits, resolving large tax debts, and more. They actively represent taxpayers throughout the entire U.S. Call today at 800-850-7973 to get started. That number again is 800-850-7973, and you can visit them online at thetaxdefensegroup.com. We recently launched our website, ucaststudios.com, with articles about sports, special interest topics, and more. We have some cool stuff on our site. To read our content, please visit ucaststudios.com. Hi, welcome to the Great Western Podcast. This is Marcus, and today I'm joined by Jonny Arnett with the Jonny Arnett YouTube channel. Thanks for coming on, man, and dude, if you wouldn't mind, can you, cue us up for the game today?
It's Game 4 of the Western Conference Semifinals, 2001, Los Angeles Lakers and the Sacramento Kings. And, the rivalry's just brewing here. The Lakers are yet to lose a game. They're dominating. Shaq's dominating. Kobe's dominating. Sacramento's got their backs up against the wall, but you wouldn't know that it's an elimination game the way they were playing, because it looked like they believed in themselves, and they did not look like they were on the verge of being swept. That's for sure.
Well, I mean, I think one thing that's really interesting about this matchup in that, a lot of people, they look back at the 2001 Lakers, and, obviously there's a talk about how they had one of the greatest playoff runs ever. And I think that there's a lot of, I think there's kind of a knack to maybe a little bit underrate the competition at this time the Lakers played. I mean, it wasn't like they were playing a bunch of crap teams. I mean, so this is the second round, and they're playing the Sacramento Kings, who only had one less win than they did that season. The Lakers won 56 wins. The Kings had 55. They're in Sacramento, and I think that you raised a really good point that even though the Lakers started off, I mean, they were up 3-0 in this series. I mean, the Kings, I actually kind of thought had quite a bit of poise until pretty much the end. The end, they definitely seemed like it's okay, well, now they're playing emotionally. And I think Chris Webber just had a horrible turnover at the end. He just threw it. I'm trying to think of who did he throw it directly into the hands of? Was that Fisher or Horry? It was just directly right into his hands. It was such a bad turnover.
Yeah, his just court awareness and stuff wasn't there. It's kind of funny because I was planning on getting into Weber at some point. He's a great player. I mean, he could score pretty well. He get a lot of rebounds. He plays well within the Sacramento offense. Good team ball. He was really good in transition, especially his days with the Warriors. But if I was to ever make a solo video of him on my channel, two things I would not praise him for is his basketball IQ and his ability to play clutch down the stretch. I mean, it's funny because one of the things that Chris Webber is the most famous for, I'm not trying to be harsh, but it's just a real observation I was seeing, is one of the things he was most criticized for was that play when he was, in college, when he basically travels first and then calls a timeout. They don't have a timeout, and they get a technical foul, and basically they lose a game they were supposed to win because he does a blunder and doesn't realize the situation. And there are so many instances in this game where Webber was having just moments where he's just not thinking, J.R. Smith type moments, what are you doing? What's up with that pass? Or what's up with your attitude even? He had a technical foul in the first quarter, and he keeps yelling at the refs. And there's a couple instances where he really lashes out. At one point, he's getting ready to spike the basketball, and even Kobe talks to him as bro, stay in the game. Because, Kobe's a real competitor. A lot of guys in that situation would be yeah, if their best player gets ejected, that's awesome. It's but Kobe was no, if we're going to beat you, we want you to be out on the court. But Webber, was really close to being ejected. I honestly think with the way he responded to the refs after he got his first technical foul on numerous occasions, if that wasn't Game 4, an elimination game in their building, he would have been ejected. If that was just another regular season game, I think there was a couple instances where the refs would have tossed him. But just because of the context, they weren't willing to do that.
Dude, if it was Dwight Howard in the 2020 playoffs, they would have suspended him for 10 games. Dude, in the way that they were treating him in game one against the Trailblazers, I mean, dude, I feel like Dwight was just walking in there like, all right, that's a foul. I mean, but that's neither here nor there. I mean, dude, you raised a really good point. I mean, I think that, it's easy to look back at somebody like Weber, and I think a lot of us might, I don't know, kind of like overlook him or kind of say, maybe underappreciate how good of a player he was. But I mean, at this time, I mean, dude, he was like, it was a first team player. Like, he was on the All NBA first team, and like, dude, he was a fairly good player. Like, I mean, he actually was like fairly accomplished. And I mean, I don't know. Like, I think you raise a really good point where it's kind of like, I don't know. I mean, maybe people just remember all the faults, but I mean, yeah, dude, I mean, he was a 5-time All-Star, like, All-NBA first team once, 3-time All-NBA second team. I mean, dude, I don't know, man. It was Rookie of the Year. Like, I don't know. If you had to compare him, who would you say is the player most like him today? Or reminds you the most of him?
Oof. Yeah, that's tough to say because I don't feel like there's many. I don't feel like power forwards operate the way Chris Webber used to be honest. Because he didn't spread the floor. He wasn't like a 3-point shooter in any way, and so many power forwards do that now. And he wasn't the most athletic, but he was strong and liked to score with his back to the basket. I mean, the way Joel Embiid plays, if Joel Embiid was a little bit smaller and a power forward, he would be very Chris Webber-like. Like, I think they have a similar style, even though one's a center and one's a power forward. But yeah, I think part of the reason Webber gets so overlooked is, the era he played in, because he played in the era of great power forwards. You have Kevin Garnett, Tim Duncan, and Dirk Nowitzki. Like, those guys get all the attention for the great power forwards, and he's just kind of like the B tier of those great power forwards that are kind of a little bit of an afterthought. But he was a great player. I mean, he had a great game, 21 points, 11 rebounds, 8 assists. But like many players, he had his flaws too. And it was just a really bad game for him. But that was something that was kind of coming back to me in my memory. I was like, oh yeah, I mean, I kind of forgot how many blunders he had, like, just continuously throughout his career, where it's just like, dude, like, get your head in the game. What's going on here? But he had 6 turnovers. He was 8 for 25 from the field, which wasn't normal. It wasn't normal for him to shoot 32%. But yeah, so it wasn't his best night. But yeah, a lot of his teammates really came and showed up. Peja Stojakovic, man, that's a guy who never gets talked about anymore. It was an absolute sniper, a 3-point shooter who would kill it in today's game. He scored 26 points this game. And Hedo Turkoglu, he's another one of them. Hedo was hitting some crazy tough shots, man, like some unreal shots down the stretch.
Yeah. No, I mean, dude, you raise a really good point, man. I mean, I feel like with this Kings team, it's like, dude, everything about them just seems so like funky. Like, I don't know. Like, I mean, obviously compare this to, like, I don't know, the games you're talking about before in the 80s, and I feel like even, I don't know, the 80, I think, yeah, we did the 89, was it 89 or 88 Pistons Laker game that we did first episode?
That was the one the Lakers won, so that must have been 88. That was Game 7, 1988 finals. So
between that game to this game is only 13 years, right? And between now to that game we're reviewing right now, I mean, that's 19 years. Like I feel like this game feels so much more modern to me. Like, I mean, I know that, like, the pace is a little slower in that, obviously, like, this was more of a defense-heavy era than it was offensive, like, heavy, but it just feels so much, like, closer to home. Like, multiple of these guys played with people that are, like, still in the league right now. I mean, like, for goodness sakes, I mean, like, Shaq actually played with Kobe, and I mean, Fisher was on the Thunder for a while even. So, like, this feels so much more like a modern game. But with that said, man, it's interesting to see the way that some of these dudes looked. Like, the Europeans on the Kings, it was just like, dude, these guys, like, I think I've heard Bill Simmons say that before, where he's like, I like seeing these European players where I think that after they play, they might go out and, like, smoke a cigarette. And I'm trying to think of the last guy in the league that kind of reminded me of that was oh my gosh, who was it? It was that Greek guy. He played for the Clippers for like a year or two, like right around the time that they traded Chris Paul. What was that guy's name?
Oh, I'm not sure.
He was like 30 years old when he came into the NBA. Like, I think he did okay. Gosh, I'll have to try to look him up. But dude, they definitely had that kind of look to them.
Yeah, I mean, you've got guys like Scott Pollard, who's just got like the mean chops going down the sides of his face.
Oh my gosh!
And then you got Chase Williams, white chocolate out there, look all tatted up and everything. Which he had a terrible game. Now he didn't have a ton of minutes; he only played 18 minutes. But Bobby Jackson, a Sixth Man of the Year candidate, consistently he had more minutes actually than Jason Williams. Chase not on the team the following year, and Mike Bibby's on the team the following year, and Mike Bibby was huge. He was clutch down the stretch for them for the 2002 Kings. So I think that's a big reason why, one of the big reasons why this Kings team didn't do as well against the Lakers, is having that stability and Bibby kind of running things from the point guard spot would be good for them the following year. But they were deep. And then you had Vlade Divac, who did a decent job on Shaq, all things considered. He had 18 points, 10 rebounds. He didn't shoot much, but he got to the free throw line and he hit 10 out of his 10 free throws. But yeah, I was reminded how much flopping Vlade Divac did too. He was kind of one of the OG floppers from way back.
Dude, he was a pioneer in the field of flopping.
Yeah, yeah. Even when he played with the Lakers too. I'm not just hating on the Kings. Like when he played with the Lakers in the '90s, like that was a thing too. Like, and he was always trying to take charge from like 6'3", 6'4" point guards would like run into him, and the 7-footers just like like falling all over the ground.
Dude, the guy that I was thinking about, it's Milos Teodosic. Dude, you remember that guy, dude? I actually remember thinking like, oh, maybe this guy's all right. But yeah, he was a Serbian dude drafted by the, I think he was drafted by the Clippers when he was 30. 3 years ago. I don't know where, I guess now I don't know where he is now, but
there's hope for me and you, bro. If he's getting drafted when he's 30, I gotta go hit the G League.
Dude, if you look him up, dude, he's like, he looks like the most recent player that I can consciously think of in the NBA that kind of looks like some of the dudes on the Kings were like, I mean, even, I don't know, like the Europeans now, I mean, like so many of them, they're like kind of more like cut, like a little bit, they actually look athletic. Like that guy straight looked like a guy that you'd find at like a rec center that was just taller than the average guy. But dude,
yeah,
we haven't really talked about him a lot though, but dude, this was like, dude, what an amazing time to be a Lakers fan. Like, could you imagine this? I mean, you go through this era of the 90s where, again, I mean, it wasn't like the Lakers were trash during those 10 years, but kind of more like a meandering franchise. Probably something akin to like the Jazz for the last couple of years, where it's like, pretty good team, but, certainly not like a championship roster, basically from the point of Magic retiring to the point of them getting Shaq in free agency. Like, I mean, good players, but nothing really. Like, you knew you weren't going to win a title with that team, but dude, and now here you are, 2001. Like, you've already won the first title, so you already had those jitters kind of out where, like, you're not so afraid, or you're not feel like, okay, we can't overcome this moment. And now, dude, you're just steamrolling through the competition. It's almost like in WWE when there's like a newer wrestler that they really want to promote and have really be the face of the the wrestling federation, whatnot. Like, it's almost like a Brock Lesnar, where Brock Lesnar, when he first came onto the scene, it was like he was just unstoppable. Like, he's just beating everybody. And this almost feels like that a little bit with the Lakers, where here it is now, because this was the second season with Phil Jackson, and dude, it's just like, just so dominant. And I was thinking about that, like, you kind of talked about this a little before we started going, but I mean, dude, just this combination of like Shaq and Kobe. Like, I mean, I think some people, they're a little bit too quick where they're like, well, Shaq, he couldn't shoot the three ball, so he wouldn't be able to play today, and he was so horrible at free throws. But like, dude, I almost think today, dude, I mean, who in the league could stop Shaq today?
Yeah, well, that was the thing about the way the game was played back then in the Western Conference is teams were focused on acquiring big bodies to throw at Shaq. You know, even guys who weren't great players, they just wanted multiple looks. I mean, you know, the Kings would, you know, throw different guys at him like Vlade Divac and Scott Pollard. I feel like Scott Pollard was there just for Shaq. You know, and he'd come in and he didn't really do anything else. He wasn't much of a scorer. He wasn't a great rebounder, but he'd just come and he'd bang bodies with Shaq. And then even, you know, Weber would have a crack at it and just rotating fouls. And San Antonio had big bodies and Portland had big bodies to throw at the Lakers. But Shaq would always, you know, be somewhat contained through the Western Conference playoffs. And then he'd get his finals MVP and dominate in the NBA finals from 2000 to 2002 because it was always the East teams that were not built to handle Shaq. That was not something they thought about, but every Western Conference team built their teams, at least their bigs, to handle Shaq. So I think the league would have to adjust. I mean, of course, any player who goes to the modern game is going to have to adjust to the modern game, but they'd have to adjust to Shaq. I mean, he makes big guys, big, intimidating bodies look like just high school kids. And if he was in today's league against a lot of these lengthy, scrawny, more skill type players, he would eat them up, man. There would be so many and one opportunities. Maybe he's not making a ton of his free throws, but there's so many times where guys are trying to drag him down, and if you're not big and strong enough, he's dunking right through you. So,
well, I think that's another thing too. People would think that it's like, oh, well, you would have a Joel Embiid or Jokic, and they would drag Shaq out to the 3-point line, and then they'd shoot. But the thing is, like, even for these bigs, I mean, they're normally shooting in like the 30% from 3-point line, and it's, I don't know, man. I mean, would I rather have that, or would I rather have Shaq, where it's like this dude's gonna like hit 70% of his shots when he's in the interior, like. I don't know, man. I've thought about that. It's like, how would you stop this? And then you have the combination of, you have all these shooters around him, and then you have Kobe. Like, talk about, I mean, I know a lot of people today too, they say it's like, oh, well, Kawhi has such an amazing mid-game or mid-range game, and he's so blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, Kawhi is like a really good player. But you know what's like even a better version of Kawhi is Kobe. Like, dude, watching Kobe in this game, you're just like, oh my gosh. And like, what was Kobe in this game? He was like, what, like 22? Was he 23?
He was 22 years old. And just the athleticism. I mean, Kobe with the fro, he was just different, man. And I just kind of forgot like how fascinating it was because he never looks tired. And Kobe said that before. When he was young, he never got tired, you know? And 48 points, 16 rebounds, like he is going up, like elevating and tearing down these rebounds. And he's going at like 100% the whole game. Like a lot of it's stop and go, but his explosiveness, he never at one point in the game looks weary. And he played all 48 minutes. I'm not sure if you noticed that, but he never went to the bench. I'm looking at it right now. 48 minutes. Like that's so unheard of, but it was no big deal. You know, it was he never looked tired. He was great on defense. He was great on offense. Kobe was incredible, and he shot 19 free throws. But at no point did I feel like he was shooting free throws where I was like, that was kind of a ticky-tack call, or that wasn't a whistle they needed to blow. Like he forced their hand because of his athleticism, because of his explosiveness, his ability to get by the defenders. He was consistently attacking the rim because that's something Kobe with the fro did, you know, before he got into his older years is, you know, you saw a little bit of his perimeter game and his jumpers and stuff in this game, but there was a lot of attacking the rim. And that kind of diminishes a little bit. And it's more just about the perimeter play later on. But yeah, with this Kobe, he got to the line a lot, and he was finishing down low a lot, and he was coming at you for sometimes 48 minutes. Like that's just incredible.
Well, then another thing to mention too is that this season too, I mean, Kobe made the second All-NBA defensive team, so it's like, dude, I mean, Kobe was like on both sides of the court. Like that's one thing I remember some of the talking heads said after the Raptors won the title last year, it's like, well, Kawhi is. I think it was Max Kellerman that said that Kawhi was doing things that, like, I think he said something about Kobe, like comparing Kawhi to Kobe, and saying like, oh, I don't know if he said Kawhi surpassed Kobe, but something like they were on the same level, and it's like, dude, I just don't see that, man. Dude, like
a lot of these guys have revisionist history, and they need to go back and watch some of these games again. Because, there's the whole narrative that Shaq carried Kobe, which is stupid. I mean, if you wanted to argue that Shaq was Batman and Kobe was Robin, I think that's disrespectful to call Kobe a Robin. But at the same time, I would acknowledge that the offense was played through Shaq. That was the priority. Like, Kobe had games like this where he dropped 48 points, sure. But it was always Kobe asserting himself. Phil Jackson designed the offense to where it goes as Shaq goes. If they're going to win a championship, they're going to run things through Shaq, ultimately. But at the same time, you have this narrative that Shaq carried Kobe, but how many games, important playoff games, does Shaq foul out? Shaq got in foul trouble a lot, and it was always Kobe who had to close it out. This was another one of those games. Like, Kobe plays 48 minutes, Shaq plays 37 minutes, and that was the point he fouled out. And it was Kobe who closed it out. It was a close game that they could have lost if Kobe isn't doing his thing. And then in 2000, which was a year before this, as a 21-year-old, you remember Game 4? I believe it was Game 4 versus Indiana in Indiana. He fouls out, and Kobe just takes over with like 8 points in overtime. And there's another game, I think, in the NBA Finals this year in 2001. Shaq fouls out, and Kobe closes it out again. And it's like, you can't just brush that off and say somebody carried somebody when literally the wing is closing out these games in the crucial moments as a 21 or 22-year-old. Like, sorry, that guy was not carried.
Well, I mean, I think that whole notion, too, where it's like, oh, well, I remember talking to a friend, it's probably like 6 years ago, and he was like, well, Kobe's 3 titles, he's like, that really only counts as, it's like maybe like 2 or 1.5 because, because he was with Shaq, and it was like, all right, like, again, that's such revisionist history. It's like, first off, it wasn't like the two of them came together to form a super team. Like, I mean, for all the, like, apocryphal tales of Kobe, I mean, there was a possibility that maybe Kobe would not have turned into Kobe, and he could have just been a really good player, but not like not like a legend like how he ended up becoming. But like, firstly, like that could have potentially happened just as much as what actually happened. But secondly, I mean, dude, like, I mean, when Shaq came there, it's like he wasn't going there to form a super team. I mean, you could say that the talent that he left in Orlando at that time was actually better than the talent that was at the Lakers at that very moment. And I don't know. I just, like you were kind of saying, like, I think there's a lot of, like, revisionism. Like, I don't know. I mean, Kobe really blossomed. And I don't know. I always think, too, I mean, for excellent teams, I mean, how many spectacular historical teams only had one really good player on them? I mean, I can't think of many where you say, oh, well, that was an all-time great team, but they only had one good player. I mean,
no.
I mean, yeah, I mean, in the same people that's like they want to give Kobe crap for, teaming with Shaq, it's like, well, these are the same people a lot of times I might like praise LeBron and, and I like LeBron, but I mean, look how many people LeBron has sought out that are just great talents, I mean, working with Wade and Bosh and Kyrie and Kevin Love and Anthony Davis, I mean, that's quite a bit different than Kobe, who was drafted, ended up being drafted by the Lakers, and Shaq being there, and then having Gasol get traded there. I mean, that was it, basically. And then, the NBA's illegal blocking of the trade of Chris Paul. But, I mean, beyond that, I guess, and also Dwight. But, yeah, I don't know. I think it's very fascinating, the mental gymnastics that people jump through to diminish Kobe.
Yeah, and something I was going to say on that is it does bother me when people bring up these excuses or narratives to basically take rings away from a guy. He's like it's like what you were saying with the guy you were talking to, where Kobe's 3 rings only just count as like 1.5 or something like that. It's like, okay, well, you're going to take the good fortune from his career and use that against him. But are you going to take the negative fortune in his career and give him bonus rings for that? Because it's like you said, like, the Chris Paul trade should have happened. Like, Dan Gilbert and Mark Cuban throwing a fit because they don't want another Miami team doesn't mean that anything they did was illegal. You know, they should have had Chris Paul. Or how about Andrew Bynum being out injured in the 2008 NBA Finals, so they lose to the Celtics in 6 games? Now, I'm not saying they definitely win with Bynum, but having some more interior defense and better rebounding definitely would have helped in that series. And so are we giving Kobe bonus rings for that? Or how about the fact that Kobe spent 3 of his prime years with teammates like Smush Parker and Chris Mihm? Well, what if he had great teammates, or some of even the supporting cast that like LeBron has had, or Magic has had, or Bird has had during their prime? Are we giving Kobe bonus rings for that? So again, I just hate it when you use like a guy's good fortune or good teammates or something and take away from him, because you don't do the same on the other spectrum. When like things are working against him, you don't say, okay, well, we're going to give him another ring for that. Really, he has 7 rings. It's like, nobody does that.
No, I mean, and I understand. I mean, if we're talking about like I looked this up once, like Robert Parrish. Did you know that he was on one of the Bulls teams, like during the second three-peat?
Yep.
And it's like, okay, fine. If you want to say, you know, okay, well, that title doesn't mean as much as, you know, the Boston 3 meant. It's like, okay, fine. I mean, I can kind of see that argument. If we're talking about a guy that only played, you know, very sparingly off the bench and didn't really do much, I mean, I could see that argument more. But, I mean, it's not like what you're saying. I mean, this isn't like, you know, Kobe was a bench warmer that played only in garbage time. I mean, this dude played the entire game, every single minute of the game. I mean,
yeah,
I don't know. It's a very interesting narrative.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I mean, it's just a very interesting narrative, and I feel like, you know, no one ever uses this excuse to diminish Larry Bird with, you know, McHale and Parrish. Like, no one uses this to diminish Magic with Kareem and Worthy. You know, no one uses this to diminish Bill Russell, even though the fact that, like, what was it, like one season, wasn't it something like 20% of all All-Stars were on his team? Like, 20% of all All-Stars in the NBA were on Russell's teams. Like, no one uses that stuff against them. But then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, Kobe was with Shaq, and that means that he didn't do anything. It's like, if it wasn't for Kobe, I mean, well, do you think that the Lakers would have three-peated if Kobe wasn't on the team?
Oh, heck no. No way. No way. I mean, Kobe averaged 37 and 7 over the 01 playoffs. Like, you can't just take that away. And that's not even getting into his defense. And so, I mean, how much they dominated. And in 2000, the game-winning shot against Phoenix, the way he closed out the game against Indiana. I mean, actually, the best example of when they won their first championship in 2000, and Kobe hadn't even emerged into superstar status yet. He was averaging a little over 20 points a game. He was 20 years old in 2000. But Game 7 against Portland, remember they're heading into the fourth quarter where they're down by like 15 points? Kobe shot like 8 of 8 in that final quarter. It's something ridiculous. I wrote a script about it, and he was ridiculously efficient, and he outscored and out-rebounded Shaq in that fourth quarter. They're getting eliminated. And Shaq had opportunities, you know. He had opportunities. He went to the NBA Finals against Hakeem, and he got destroyed by Hakeem, and they lost in like 4 or 5 games. And, you know, he had Penny Hardaway, who for a while people were calling the next Michael Jordan, but Kobe's a step above Penny Hardaway. And so no, I don't think they're three-peating. Shaq definitely deserved the Finals MVP every year he won it when they were playing the Eastern Conference. But if you were to give the playoff MVP, like the Western Conference playoffs MVP, you could argue that Kobe should have won it in 2001 and 2002 because he killed the Kings, he killed the Spurs. Like, more often than not, that was Kobe's time to shine. And Shaq was awesome too. I'm not saying he didn't show up, but they needed each other because look at any team that three-peats or at least comes close to three-peating. Normally they have an array of all-stars. It was just Shaq and Kobe and a bunch of role players. Like, they equally needed each other. And so, again, it's not even fair to call them like Batman and Robin. You'd have to call them like Superman and Batman, I think is more fair.
Well, do you, like, if we were going to compare them, the 01 Lakers, to, let's say, the Lakers right now, the 2020 Lakers, I mean, do you feel like the dynamic between LeBron and Davis is kind of more akin to Kobe and Shaq, where it's kind of like, instead of Batman Robin, it's Superman Batman? Or do you view Davis and LeBron as, you know, LeBron is Batman and Davis is Robin?
I feel a little bit more like LeBron is Batman and Davis is Robin, just because we really need to see Anthony Davis kind of assert himself in the playoffs. And what I mean is, like, first of all, this is his first year being a Laker, so of course he can't have done that for the Lakers yet. But he really wants to be seen as kind of the same LeBron. Them winning games or even winning playoff series exclusively like because of him, or majority because of him, that would do a lot for him. Because that was Shaq and Kobe, man. They had games where it was all Shaq, and there was games where it was all Kobe. And both guys just had a knack for showing up when it mattered most. I mean, Shaq in the NBA Finals for like 2 years in a row, he started off games 1 and games 2 with like 40 points and nearly 20 rebounds in both games. Like, you really don't talk about big men who just kind of, you know, bang down low and, you know, get a lot of rebounds and score on layups and dunks as like clutch players. For some reason, we just want to talk about that concept with like wings and perimeter players and jump shooters. But Shaq, as with the Lakers especially, was very clutch and really showed up when it mattered. And when he didn't, Kobe did. And so we've seen that from LeBron in years past. We have to see Davis do that before I'm ready to put him as like a Superman Batman type situation.
I mean, I will say that Davis's performance in Game 2 against the Trailblazers this year,
yeah,
I mean, it certainly looked like in that direction, but no, I mean, I agree with you.
Again, that's one game, and I thought of that too. I mean, but you know, Kobe and Shaq had playoff series where they're averaging like, you know, Kobe. What did he average for this series? I need to look because it was a lot. he was so lethal this series. I'm looking it up right now. Okay, so here's Kobe's numbers this playoff series: 35 points, 9 rebounds, 4.3 assists, and 1.3 steals on 47% shooting. Shaq, 33 points, 17 rebounds, 3.3 blocks on 59% shooting. You can't call either of those guys Robin. I did say in my GOAT team video in my 01 Lakers, if you want to call one of them Robin, if you insist upon it, then you have to call them the greatest Robin in playoff history. Like, that's just what it is. There isn't a Robin who compares to the way these two were performing. Because usually when you have a team this dominant, like I said, it's usually 3 great all-star players, like a McHale and a Bird and a Parrish, or a Kareem and a Magic and a Worthy, you know, or a Kevin Durant, Klay Thompson, Steph Curry. Like, it's usually not just a 1-2 punch getting it done. I think Michael and Scotty are the other exception to that. But even in their second three-peat, they had Rodman.
Yeah, I mean, because that's something, again, like what you're saying, that's so fascinating about this three-peat is that, I mean, there's not like the third guy that's like, you know, the definitive known for being the third best guy. You know, like, I mean, there's no one that made the All-Star teams. There's no one that made any kind of, even like for the Warriors in 2017, I mean, didn't Draymond Green win Defensive Player of the Year? And him and Klay also went to the All-Star game with Curry and Durant. So it's like, I mean, yeah, 4 All-Stars. With that even being said, I mean, you know, after watching this game and kind of looking at it more, I think I'd take the 01 Lakers over the 2017 Warriors. I really think I would. After watching this, dude, I just think I'm like, Dude, how are the Warriors gonna stop Shaq and Kobe? And like people are gonna say, well, how are they gonna stop the Warriors? It's like, dude, I don't know, man. Like, did you look at the bodies and like the defensive abilities for like the Lakers? Dude, I feel like we have a lot easier time throwing bodies at Curry and Durant than they do Kobe and Shaq.
Yeah, because a lot of these Laker players were some underrated defenders. Derek Fisher could play good defense. Rick Fox was a terrific wing defender who never gets the credit he deserves. Robert Horry was long and lengthy and disciplined. Like, he can defend. And, of course, Kobe. I mean, Kobe's going to, he's playing all 48 minutes at his age, too. So he's going to be out there locking a dude up the entire game. So all you need is those other Laker role players to step up a little bit and fill in. But, yeah, I think the rules depend on it a little bit. But yeah, either way, I think like you said, Lakers would have a very good shot at it. They might take it because there's certain areas where it's like, who's going to stop this guy? Like, I don't know. The Kings had great defenders too. I mean, Doug Christie was a great defensive player. Nobody really talks about him. That was a deep Sacramento team. I'll say it again. They had a 6-man of the year candidate, Chris Webber, Peja Stojakovic, 3-point assassin. Hito Turkoglu's a great, utility guy who could shoot as well, and he was shooting in this game. Jason Williams, Vlade Divac was even a decent center, put up 19-10 this game. Like, this was a deep team. This is not a team you sweep out of the semifinals. But, yeah, Lakers were just that good.
Dude, it was just like it was a perfect combination of all these things coming together. You got Phil, you have Shaq, you have Kobe, and dude, I mean, it was so beautiful, man. And I think it sucks kind of, again, from the Kobe perspective where it's like, dude, he was just the revisionist history of him, especially from like the media talking heads on ESPN and Fox Sports. I mean, it was so slanderous, and it sucks that it only took his passing before they really started, laying off on that a little bit. And again, I mean, I'm not trying to say this from the aspect of, oh my gosh, just because we're from the greater LA area where, Kobe's a god and we have to treat him like that. Like, I'm not even saying that, but just from the perspective of like things he accomplished, all-star appearances, titles, all that stuff, I think it's completely ridiculous to put people like Kawhi above him or just totally diminish things that he's done, or even conversations where it's like, oh, well, who's better, Harden or Kobe? It's like if Harden was, 22 years old, if it was Luka Doncic and you wanted to make that argument where it's like at their age, it's like, I understand that, but I mean, Harden's like 30 years old and people were having this conversation last season. It's like, oh, who would you rather take, prime Kobe or prime Harden? It's like, are you kidding me? Like, dude, like, how are you even having this conversation legitimately? A guy that like has never led his team to even one finals ever. The only time he's ever been to the finals when he was the third best player on his own team. Like, right. I mean, now that really was far more of a carry. I mean, in 2012 when Harden went to the finals, he clearly was not Batman or Superman. I mean, he for sure was Robin in that situation.
Well, he was a sixth man. Yeah.
And they lost. So it's like, and they lost. It's like, I mean, you look at that and you're like, I mean, I don't know. I just feel like when I see stuff like that, like especially somebody like Harden, it's like, how are you going to put that guy above Kobe?
Here's the thing. People will act like rings don't matter. And I was on a buddy's podcast like a month ago, and we were arguing about this because he literally, I had to ask him over and over again, are you telling me that winning should carry no weight in how we compare players? And he said yes. Like, I had to ask him several times, and he says yes, it shouldn't carry any weight. Like, that is besides the point. And I was just like, wow. Because what it's about is it's not just about who gets the W and who gets the L. It's a lot of times winning is dictated by how you performed when it mattered most. The reason why the Lakers were the champions and the Kings weren't is because when it mattered, their best players played at their best. 35 points, 9 rebounds, 4 assists on 47%. That's Kobe. 33 points, 17 rebounds on 59%. That's Shaq. But then you look at Chris Webber, we talked about him. He underperformed. He had a tremendous amount of turnovers. He shot 32% in an elimination game. You can't have that from your best player in an elimination game, and then you lose and the other team wins the championship, and you say championships don't carry any weight. There's a reason why Jordan has 6 championships, and even Bill Russell. Like why he has 11 championships. Like everybody thinks, oh, Bill Russell just has 11 just because he just played with a really talented Celtics team. I mean, there's some truth to that. But there was a lot of times where it was close. They came back from a 3-1 deficit one time, and Bill Russell led that comeback. They had game 7s that were tight, and Bill Russell showed up huge, got a ton of rebounds, scored a ton of points, and they won. And it's the same thing with Jordan. Won 6 championships because in every single finals, he played out of this world. He was better than everybody else on the other side. So, again, I can't stand the narrative of, like, we shouldn't factor in championships or winning and stuff like that, because more often than not, it's the guys who performed best when it mattered that are the ones doing the winning.
I mean, dude, like, even, like, let's say, like, you look at titles like this year. I mean, if, let's say the Rockets were able to win a title this year and they beat the Bucks in the finals, dude, like, I feel like if someone wanted, like, let's say in the finals, Harden outplayed Giannis. Like, I think more people than not would say Harden's a better player than Giannis. And if they play in a head-to-head matchup in the finals and the Rockets win, how can you really dispute that, you know? So just because of the fact that you could come to that logical conclusion, then, I mean, I feel like, of course, titles matter then. Like, I mean, wouldn't you acknowledge that? Or, I mean, wouldn't you think that? Like, if the Rockets beat the Bucks in the finals this year, like, and Harden outplayed Giannis, wouldn't you have to say, okay, that's probably true. Probably Harden is a better player than Giannis.
Sure. I mean, I'd be okay with, you know, those should carry weight. I mean, maybe to just say definitively, I mean, it depends how the other players play to a certain extent. But, you know, Harden's a fantastic scorer. But there's a lot of people that have a hard time putting him ahead of the other greats, because what's one of the most common narratives about James Harden right now? And it's not even just a narrative, it's a fact. The dude isn't as good in the playoffs as he is in the regular season. Like, his numbers are not there. His performances are not there as much. And you can argue, like, why that is. You know, maybe he just has, with his iso ball and all of his dribbling and the way he plays, like, over the course of a 7-game series, teams are able to figure it out, or coaches are able to make adjustments, or, you know, it could be X number of reasons. But the reality is, like, there's truth to that. Like, he's had opportunities where he could have won a championship. They could have beat the Warriors. It was there for the taking, but they didn't take it. You don't think in that situation Michael Jordan would have took that? Or Kobe in his prime would have took that situation? Like, they did over and over again.
Today's episode is also brought to you by Writer Junkie. Are you thinking about starting a business or a side hustle? Writer Junkie offers website development, content writing, and SEO services for businesses. Call Writer Junkie today at 805-587-7966, and you can visit them online at writerjunkie.com. We'd also like to thank the Tax Defense Group for being a sponsor. Well, dude, you know what? I feel like one blemish that Harden has on his record that, like, no one ever really talks about is, like, if you want to say in 2018, it's like, well, you know, Chris Paul got injured and that's the reason why they lost. And even though they were up in game 6 and 7, you know, because Chris Paul's injury, you know, they couldn't overcome it. It's like, okay, fine. If you want to use that argument, I think that that's a legitimate one. Let's say if you want to use that one. But what about in 2019, where it was Chris Paul and Harden were both healthy? I mean, at least they played every game. And they played against a Warriors team that didn't have Durant. I mean, like, isn't that what you complained about? Like, didn't Durant get injured in game 4? So wasn't it tied? I think it was tied 2-2 in 2019. Rockets versus Warriors. Durant was gone, so it's like the Warriors lost their best player. And then what ends up happening? They lose the next 2 games. I think even in one of the games, if I'm not mistaken, I think Curry didn't even have a point in the first half. And then they still end up losing. It's like, what? I mean, you guys are out here talking. And then that was the infamous year where they complained about the officiating. Do you remember that? Like, they complained after game 1. They're like, oh, we're getting screwed by the refs. And blah,
Right.
blah, blah. In 2018, we only lost because of, Chris Paul. And then you guys lose. It's like, dude, I mean, come on. There was your opportunity right there. I
Yeah.
mean,
Again, I don't want this to sound like, you know, that we're just slandering these great players because they're great players. But there is such a thing as a clutch chain. There really is. When you talk about poise, in this game, in the final couple minutes, you saw it. The Lakers had it. The Kings didn't. At least in 2001. 2002 is a different conversation because whether or not the Lakers should have even won that championship is debatable because of all the referee scandals and all that. But when you're talking about this championship Lakers team against this Sacramento Kings team, like they were committing turnovers. They just looked young, inexperienced, rattled, nervous, like the moment was bigger than them. That's not the way this Phil Jackson-led team looked. Kobe looked like he was incredibly under control, incredibly comfortable, poised, even after Shaq fouled out. The team didn't panic. They weren't worried about the fact that their entire offense just changed because their centerpiece, their anchor, is now out. Like, they remained cool and collected. Like, those are the things the details that separate the champions from just the really good players. So if anything, I like that we're talking about this because I really think this is something that, especially now that we're coming around to Kobe's birthday and, 8/24 on the calendar, like just appreciating Kobe and even appreciating Shaq because these guys this year just showed up. And in 2000, they had games where they just showed up when it just really mattered.
yeah, and I mean, on top of the fact that they had the poise, they had all the accolades, I mean, dude, also for both of these players, they did it for years. And I know there's also a weird narrative where it's like, well, Shaq didn't take care of his body, and that's why his prime was cut short. And like, when you hear that, you think, oh, that must mean like Shaq had like 5 good years. Dude, Shaq had, I mean, how many good years would you say Shaq had? Like 14 good years? Like, dude, what? I mean, that's a pretty good accomplishment to have 14 good years, right? I mean, like, I haven't pulled it up. I mean, dude, it's not like Shaq was only good for like 4 years or something like that. I mean, dude, he was an incredibly good player for like many years. And the same thing with Kobe. It's like, I mean, how many years would you say that Kobe was definitively in the conversation for top 5 players in the league? I mean, what, like at least like 13 years?
From 2001 to 2013. So yeah, 12 or 13 years, 13 tops. Yeah, because in 2001, the leap from 2000 to 2001 was huge. That was when Kobe really broke out because he was putting up 22 points a game in his first year. It was clearly Shaq's team, that first championship run. But this season we're watching, this was Kobe's breakout year because it was funny. They were saying 48 points, when he had 48 points this game, but when he scored his 37th point, they were like, that's his playoff career high. Well, he just passed it, which was 36 points, which was literally the previous game. So Kobe setting all kinds of scoring records, personal records. And, he just really broke out at this point. And it went up until he tore his Achilles. So I would say a good 12, 13 years.
I mean, dude, that's like, the only player playing today that has any kind of resume that's longer term than Kobe and Shaq is LeBron. And that's only because LeBron, I know you did a video about this, the greatest, 35-year-olds, but like, dude, no one since Kobe, really, if you want to say this whole since 2000, definitely like those 3 are like the best players in terms of like the longevity of how long they were great for. Like Kobe, Shaq, and LeBron. Like, obviously LeBron is still in it, but like, dude, like, normally when players are like really great, like, I guess like Durant, maybe he can eventually have it, but a lot of times like, it takes players several years and then, like several years to really get going. And then in their 30s, a lot of them really start to diminish a lot. But I don't know, man. The fact that Kobe had such a long extended period of time of just excellence, and if he hadn't tore his Achilles, he probably would have had another couple good years in him too. Like, dude, it's astounding. Like, it truly is like the number of years of just being great. And the same thing with Shaq. Like, Shaq didn't just have 3 years of being great. I mean, he was basically great from the moment he came onto the scene to the point of like the mid 2000s. I mean, I don't know. Like I remember I watched a video on YouTube talking about that. It's like, oh, if Shaq took better care of himself. It's like, yeah, I mean, if Shaq took better care of himself, I mean, maybe he could have had a couple more really good years in him. But like, I think it's very belittling to make it sound like Shaq was just, he was so horrible in his diet and he was just so fat or blah, blah, blah that, he didn't want to take care of himself. So he's only great for a couple years. It's like, that's not really the case. And I mean, especially you watch this game. I mean, dude, Shaq's arms look totally ripped. Like, and I know somebody might say, like, oh, well, the way someone looks sometimes can be a little deceitful or blah, blah, blah. Like, all I know, dude, is when I saw Shaq out there, he did not look like he was out of shape the way Embiid looks like he's out of shape.
Sure. Like, well, 2000 to 2001, that would definitely be where you wouldn't make that argument because Shaq's basically in his prime still. I would argue that 2000 was his best year, but 2001 is not far behind it. But it was like 2003 or 2004 that really ticked off Kobe, where Shaq came into training camp fat. Now, again, he'd been in the league for 12 years at that point. He's getting a little bit older, and he was still productive. He helped Miami win a championship and everything. So, again, I get what you're saying. It's like maybe he could have extended his really good years like a couple years, but it's not long. He had, like I said, he'd already, as a big guy, had been in the NBA for 12 seasons. And, I mean, part of that, Shaq put on weight from his Orlando days to his Lakers days. But to a certain extent, that was a good thing. Like, it made him even more dominant down in the paint. You kind of lost some of his, like, able to run, coast to coast consistently like he was with the Magic. But, with the Lakers, a lot of that weight that he put on was a good thing. It just, at a certain point, like in 2003, it was a little too much. But again, over a decade of being arguably the best center in the league.
Yeah, I mean, that's just the way that I view it, where it's, I mean, it's just really weird the mental gymnastics people go to really kind of try to diminish Shaq, try to diminish Kobe, and I feel like even a little bit in a weird way diminish Davis, like Anthony Davis today, where I was listening to a podcast the other day and they're like, oh, Davis is a top 8 player in the league. Mm-hmm. I'm like, a top 8 player? Like, what the heck happened? Like, all of a sudden this guy goes from being the Lakers could offer every single thing that the team has and it still wouldn't be enough for Davis. Now all of a sudden he's the 8th best player in the league? Like, what, you think Jimmy Butler is better than Anthony Davis now? Like, what the heck happened? Like, am I missing something? Like, I mean, I feel like when I watch Davis, I certainly don't think 7 people are better than him.
Right.
But
right.
yeah, all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, Davis is okay. And, Kobe, it's like, oh, well, I mean, I feel like there's people that, I mean, if Kawhi wins a title this year with the Clippers, probably people are going to come out on TV and they're going to say that Kobe was a poor man's Kawhi. It's going to be something so ridiculous where you're going to be like, oh my gosh, like, I can't believe they said that. It'll be so hot takey, but I could also totally envision it being said.
I think you got to stop watching Max Kellerman.
Dude, it's just, man, the takes, they're so bad, man. I mean, some of these people, I mean, I know I reference it, and I feel like every time I ever do one of these podcasts, but like, dude, some of them are just so bad. Like, I mean, at least when I look at somebody like Shannon Sharp and Skip, it's like, I mean, I don't watch the whole show, but I'll watch like a couple of the big segments, like every now and again, and it's, at least for that, I feel like that's like a shtick where it's like they know, Shannon saying, Skip 5 times in a row, and then Skip Bayless taking the most like I don't know, just being the most, I don't want to say divisive, but like the most like berating take you could possibly have.
Yeah, he purposely leans into his Jordan worship just to aggravate Shannon, and it's the most hilarious thing. People act like they hate Skip, and I'm like, the dude's a meme, and he leans into it. And same thing with Shannon. Like, I don't even like fault Shannon for his opinion of LeBron the GOAT, or whenever he puts on the GOAT mask. It's great, it's fun. But you're right. I feel like with the ESPN ones, it's a little bit more like it's hot takey, but there isn't the fun, that kind of the self-aware, I guess, aspect of it.
I mean,
I tell you.
like when you listen to like even like like you listen to like a Chris Broussard or Stephen A. Smith or like Jalen Rose or Jacoby, like you listen to those guys, or like even like if you're gonna listen to some of the people like on the Ring or something like that, or oh my gosh, what's the one dude? Oh gosh, he's on Colin Cowherd's show a lot. But also Colin Cowherd. Oh, Doug Gottlieb. That's the guy I was thinking of. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like, I mean, they'll say stuff all the time where it's like, what? Like, I think we talked about this, but Colin Cowherd talking about how the Lakers this year weren't a championship contender. He said it like a week ago. And it's like, not a title contender. Like, what are you talking about? Like, I mean, if you think they're going to lose to the Clippers again, I mean, you're fine to believe that. I think, you can make arguments in both directions why they're not or they are, but like to say they're not even a contender is like, dude, like no one, I mean, I would have thought that take was outrageous, but I mean, he's just saying this crap and it's like, I don't know, man, it blows me away. These guys, I mean, it truly blows me away, but yeah, at least with Skip and Shannon, I feel like they know they're kind of in on the joke.
Yeah, no, I get you. But so getting back to the game real quick, who I really appreciated, I shouldn't say who, like it's a specific person, who I grew a greater appreciation for after I hated him for the longest time, the Sacramento Crowd. Arco Arena, like just watching this game, they were loud, dude. Like, did you notice watching it again? Like, oh my gosh, dude, like every play is acting like it's the highlight of the game. And the crowd just, ooh, ah, rah, like all this noise. And then the cowbells. It started right around that time because Phil Jackson said like Sacramento was an old cow town. And so everybody just basically coordinated like flash mob status of just like everybody got cowbells and took them to the game and were clanging their cowbells. Towards the beginning of the game, I'm not sure if you saw it, there's like one dude who's like sitting behind Phil Jackson and he like leans forward with his cowbell and is smacking the cowbell and he's literally like 2 feet away from Phil Jackson's ear. It was just kind of just a crazy atmosphere, but man, it made for some amazing playoff basketball. This was one of the more fun games to go back and rewatch, even though the quality of the video that I found wasn't the best. But
dude, and I was thinking about the quality, man. Like, dude, the quality reminded me of something like, I feel like we would have found this in like some cave and like a bootleg of a bootleg. Like it was like,
I don't know what it is, but like for some reason, all the NBC telecasts look like they're filmed with a potato. I don't get it. Like from the early 2000s and like even in the 90s and somewhat, like if it's on NBC, like it's just really low quality, but like TNT's pretty good. There's even some CBS stuff from the 80s that's pretty good, but I don't know, man. The early 2000s, I was like, come on, like we weren't watching it on this quality, were we? Like, did it really look like this when I was watching it at home when I was like 12? This doesn't seem right.
I mean, dude, who knows? Maybe that was the case. I mean, maybe we just, maybe we just think it's like, oh, well, TVs are so clear now. They were always this clear. And maybe in reality, like we look back and we're like, oh my gosh, like, dude, the audio quality was terrible of all TV and it was all like grainy and just not really like high def. I mean, now it's like, it's so high def that it takes 5 minutes to review who's out of bounds on the ball when it's 5 minutes into the first quarter. It's like, oh, who touched it last? Let's see it from all these angles. And you're at home and you're like, wow, like I'm really glad that we have all these incredible shots. I could watch something so mundane. 5 minutes into the game, I can really see who the ball's out on. But, dude, I mean, you raised a good point, man, about the Sacramento Crowd. Like, I did think that, too. I'm like, wow, they have all this energy. And, I mean, I feel like, I guess Sacramento Kings, I guess they probably feel like they have a rivalry with the Lakers. And I feel like, we were kind of more like Bennett and, like, what do they say? Hit it and, gosh, I can't remember the expression, but I feel like we were kind of like, we did that for a little while and like now we've kind of like really like moved on. like from the Kings. Like I don't really consider them like a rival.
No.
Look how many years ago this was. It's like this wasn't.
They haven't been competing forever, but that was something that crossed my mind. Is they haven't been competing forever, but that crowd, just the way they came out and supported that team during that playoff run, during all of their playoff runs in the early 2000s, like it was amazing. And I just kind of wonder, like, if you got Sacramento back into the playoffs where they're contenders, like, is that the kind of atmosphere? Obviously, you have to wait until this whole pandemic stuff is done with. But, once we're back to having, packed stadiums again, whenever that is, like, if the Kings were in the playoffs and were they contenders, like, would that atmosphere come back? Because it was kind of fascinating to me, too, because it's like, I don't know, it was almost like a college sports atmosphere where all the young students are just so passionate and so into it. You have a lot of these big cities with basketball teams, that have these crowds that are just a little bit more laid back and not as into it, like for the full 48 minutes. But then you got like freaking Sacramento of all places where it is just raucous in there. And so that was just kind of fascinating and fun for me to relive, as being like, man, I hated this crowd at the time. I hated them with the cowbells and I hated this team. But going back and watching again, I can really appreciate how passionate they were, how well this team played, and how the team and the crowd fed off of each other.
Dude, I also like, it may sound weird, but I actually kind of feel a little sad for them. Like the fact that
yeah.
They came so close all these years ago, and basically since then, they really like nothing. Like I think they're the longest. I think they're the longest playoff drought team in existence right now. I think they're the longest. I remember hearing some kind of stat. Maybe it's been like 14 years. It's either been 13 years or 14 years since they made the playoffs, and I just kind of feel sorry for them. Like I really do. Like, and I don't mean it in a demeaning way, but just in a way where, especially like a year ago, they had all this optimism. It's like, oh, they got all these good young players and things are looking good for them. And now it's, I knew things were bad when they hired Luke Walton. Like I was thinking, I'm like, oh man, dude, you guys thought we sucked. It was Luke Walton, and then they got Luke Walton, and it's like, they probably wish they had Dave Yeager right now. But, yeah, man, I actually do feel a little bad for them. Compared to their teams that we've, or I guess the other games we've compared to the Lakers. All those other teams, they had success before and after that, or especially at least after that. And it's kind of a little bit like, you win some, you lose some. It's like, even for the Rockets, like that year that they beat us in the playoffs in the 80s and they lost to the Celtics. Hakeem does go on to win the 2 titles, or even the Pistons in the game that we beat them. The Pistons go on to win 2 titles. Obviously, the Celtics won 3 titles in the 80s. But, yeah, man. Dude, it kind of sucks for the Kings.
Piggybacking off of that, I don't know how you feel about it, but even the next season, man, I don't think we deserve that championship. I really don't. Like I think they were robbed. I think the Tim Donaghy thing was crooked. I think there's footage all over Game 6 that shows it was crooked. Now, again, I'm not going to say we only have 4 champions instead of 5 championships. Like, it is what it is. And the Lakers, like, they didn't know that. They didn't know that there's stuff and strings being pulled behind the scenes potentially. They just went out there and did their jobs, and so you got to tip your hat off to them. But it felt like throughout that season that Sacramento was the better team. And when we were down 2-1 in the series and Robert Horry hits that shot at the buzzer to tie this series at 2-2, like, man, if that shot misses, we're down 3-1. It felt like we were just up against the wall at a team that felt better than us. Like, they played better as a team. They wanted it more. That's just what it felt like. But ultimately we were able to pull it out, but I felt like we might have got a little bit of help. So that plays into it of why I feel sorry for them too, is it wasn't even necessarily fair for them. And then on top of that, like, we were watching the same video, so you probably heard it too, but they're talking about Chris Webber's free agency. coming up at the end of this season. So at the end of this game, essentially, because the Kings get eliminated. And so whether or not he's going to stay with the Kings. And they were almost pretty positive that he was going to leave. Like, at one point they say that. I think Jim Gray comes in to say, like, basically it's almost a sure thing he's not going to come back. Well, we know he did come back because he was in there for the 2002 run. But they said the most important thing to Chris Webber is winning a championship. And even when I heard that, like, knowing how his career plays out and knowing like how they get robbed next year, I was just like, oh, it hurt. I bled a little inside because I was just like, that poor guy. Like, he just wanted a championship and he thought, the Sacramento Kings team, I'll stick it with them because I think we're good enough. And they were so close to being good enough. Like, the final couple minutes of overtime, Game 7 of the Western Conference playoffs. Because if they won in 2002, if they beat us, which, again, maybe they should have, but if they beat us, they're sweeping the New Jersey Nets in the NBA Finals just like we did. Like, although Jason Kidd and Kenyon Martin, Richard Jefferson, those guys were good, nobody at the time thought that the New Jersey Nets were anywhere near as good as the Kings and the Lakers. Those were clearly the cream of the crop of not just the Western Conference, but the entire NBA.
Yeah. Dude, you're right, man. It is. I mean, you look back at that and it's, you know, it sucks, dude. I mean, I obviously I really like competition, but you know, sometimes it's sad to see the fact that not everyone's going to be a winner, man. And I know we've talked about this player a number of times, you know, off podcast, but you know, like somebody like Damian Lillard, and dude, I just kind of look at him, at least his career so far, and I mean, I kind of feel a little bad for this dude. Like, I mean, I think that if he was in a better winning situation or if he won certain titles, I feel like people for sure would talk about him like a NBA Hall of Famer one day, and people would really remember him. But I feel like because of the teams that he's been on and just the fact that they really haven't done a lot, yeah, I kind of feel like he gets a little bit lost in the shuffle, and it kind of sucks for him. And it's not like Lillard has all the time in the world. I mean, I think he's like 30 now, so I mean, I mean, obviously, you know, I'm not saying he's totally cooked, but dude, it just kind of sucks, man, how things unfold for certain players where you just look at them and it's like, you know, I don't know, man, in his own era, I mean, maybe he makes the Hall of Fame, but I don't know. I don't think people are going to immediately remember him when they look back at the 2010s and the early 2020s as much as they will other point guards.
Yeah, I think they will in Portland. With Dame time and how much he's just energized that crowd and how good he was, I think Portland will. They'll remember this guy, how good he was. I just hope that he's treated, even without a championship, like that he's just a legend for that team. Because I feel like that the whole championship comparison argument, like, there's pros to it and there's cons to it. And we talked about the pros earlier, is when comparing the greats. I really feel like the best of the best find ways to win, and they perform well more often than not when it matters most, and that's why they won so much. But then you get to the cons, and it's guys like Damian Lillard, or, you know, or even like, you know, just certain teams or certain players that didn't quite have the talent of other teams, or they were so committed to their franchise. Like, that's the thing with Dame, is he's so committed to Portland. He's not for the super team era, but, you know, which gets a lot of people's respect. But at the same time, like, the only reason Anthony Davis is competing for a championship right now is because he asked for a trade and he got traded to the Lakers. Like, that's just the reality of how the league kind of works. You know, you need other stars to play with. And so, yeah, it's kind of unfortunate the way it works sometimes. Is like, I feel like Damian Lillard, in all honesty, is a championship player. I feel like he's a championship caliber player that doesn't have a championship. Like that big three that Kyrie Irving hit, you know, to put away the Warriors in 2016. Like, could I have seen Damian Lillard hitting that shot? Absolutely. Absolutely I could have. Like, but he needs to get to that stage before he can do those kind of things. Like, we haven't seen Dame time in the NBA Finals because he doesn't have, you know, enough superstar support to get him there. But is he certainly good enough? Yeah, I believe so.
Well, I mean, you look at a guy like Lillard, and I mean, this is where it kind of sucks, but I mean, you know, let's just say since 2010, just for sake of ease, I mean, I feel like when people look back at this era, there's probably like 4 point guards they'll think of first before Lillard. I think they'll think of Curry, Chris Paul, Westbrook, and probably even Kyrie Irving, just because of the experience of being in the finals and having that marquee. It's like, oh my gosh, look at his 2016, you know, look at him in the playoffs, look how great he was. Whereas, you know, for Lillard, I mean, he's made one conference finals and they got swept, and the Warriors didn't even have Durant. I mean, and again, I mean, kind of even in that sense is applicable to this Kings team. Like,
Yeah.
if this Kings team, if they had beaten, or maybe not specifically 2001, but like, let's say we were talking about like the 2002 team. I mean, if they had beaten the Lakers that year, I mean, how many more of the players on that team would be more household NBA fans is like in their kind of, you know, they would have made their radar more. Like, how many of those players would have been kind of more committed to memory? But because they lost in the conference finals, it's like a lot of people, a lot of at least modern NBA fans don't even really even know a lot of those players' names even.
Sure. You know, a team that gets a lot of praise and people like to bring up, I guess the more hardcore NBA fans like to bring up, is like the 2004 Pistons, you know, that had like Ben Wallace and Chauncey Billups was like the finals MVP, and had Richard Hamilton. Like, they had a great collection of talent that was able to take out the team with the 2004 Lakers with the bigger names. And so they're remembered really fondly. I kind of get that vibe a little bit with the Sacramento Kings team, where it's like, you know, at best, Chris Webber is like a tier 2, you know, NBA superstar. But, you know, they just had so many like good pieces and such a great collection of talent between Hedo Turkoglu, between the incredible shooting of Peja Stojakovic, you know, and impacts from guys like Bobby Jackson off the bench, and a 1-2 punch of Chris Webber and Jason Williams, which eventually became Mike Bibby, and all of his big shots that he was doing. And with just that crowd backing, I'm like, man, that if they won, yeah, they would be remembered as one of those just great collection of talent teams. Because even at points watching this game, like, that was kind of the narrative about this Kings team is, you know, the Lakers win because they have Shaq and Kobe. This Kings team wins because they play basketball the right way and they played as a team. You know, and that's kind of how people saw it. And they were a great team with their ball movement, the way they all contributed. It was like, to each night, you never knew who was going to be the leading scorer. It could be Chris Webber one night. It could be Peja one night. It could be Jason Williams or Hedo or Bobby Jackson. And it wouldn't surprise you because all of these guys, you know, contributed and did their part.
Well, I guess we found out at the end, you know, having the big names showing up and doing big name stuff is that trumps everything else, I guess.
It did in this series, but going back to it, in 2002, I felt like that might have been their year, and they might have deserved it. It just didn't happen for reasons we know why.
Well, I think even a more modern example of that would probably be the 2014 Spurs versus the Heat. I mean, probably at that time, even with Wade, with all of his health issues at that point, I mean, probably more people than not would have taken LeBron and Wade over anybody on the Spurs at that year. I mean, again, we got to remember, like, Kawhi, it wasn't like Kawhi was averaging 25 points that season. I mean, I don't even know if he even averaged double digits that year. So, I mean, you probably would have, you probably would have taken LeBron and Wade over anybody on the Spurs, and yet that Spurs team got, like, spanked. So, I guess sometimes it does help to have an actual team versus the, you know, just the names. But all right, Johnny. Well, dude, thank you so much for coming on, man. Dude, you got anything cool cooking on your channel right now?
Yeah, actually, I'm gonna try to get. I'm trying to get 2 Kobe videos done for his birthday and for Mamba Day, which is 8/24. We'll see. I know at the very least I'm going to have one video done for Kobe, and this video is going to be called. Actually, I'm not totally sure what it's going to be called, but it's essentially going to be 8 things that not many people know about Kobe, essentially. And being like the ultimate Kobe superfan, who I know more about him than any other player ever, I thought, what are like the 8 things that very few people know about? And I texted you them, and you like basically didn't know any of them. So I'm excited to share some of that stuff in the video because I think there's some interesting things to offer.
Well, do you have a teaser? Is there one that you can maybe tease a little bit?
I mean, sure. I mean, we even have different audiences to a certain extent on our channel, so I'm not too worried if they hear it here. But one of the things is Kobe lost in 2008 to the Boston Celtics, right?
Yeah.
And so I'll just kind of go over this real quickly, the non-scripted version. But he loses to the Boston Celtics in 2008. And this just kind of sums up like why Kobe's my favorite player, why he's so fascinating, how he's just wired differently. But he loses in 2008, and Journey is playing Don't Stop Believing. They played We Are the Champions in Boston Stadium. They played all the different songs they played. But as Kobe's exiting and heading into the tunnel, it's playing Don't Stop Believing. So he hated that song. He built up a natural association of that song and failing to win a championship and losing to the Celtics. So what does Kobe do? He does the most Mamba mentality thing ever, and he listens to that song every single day until they win the championship in 2009 to motivate himself and to keep that memory and that pain and that motivation fresh in his mind. It's just not like normal people don't do that. But at the same time, it worked. Like look at the results. So that's just fascinating. Like little details, little stories like that. Kobe actually does talk about that a little bit. And I'm sure some of the things they talk about, like there'll be Kobe fans who know like all stories, but stuff like that, like nobody talks about that, but that's fascinating to me.
Dude, he really was an incredible athlete, an incredible mind. And I guess on that note, yeah, man, well, definitely thank you so much, Jonny, for coming on, and I will talk to you later.